and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 2nd of August 2021. I am joined as ever by Andy Brockman, my co-host and stalwart colleague down in the storm-laden south, the internet-starved supposed capital of this country, where until very recently he was moving at about 2 or 3 frames per second. Um,
It was a bit like watching the Thunderbirds in slow motion.
In slow motion, absolutely yes. That just about gets there. But
It was terrible.
nonetheless, regardless of internet issues, our mission continues. Our watching brief does continue, and this week we have a slightly different serving for you. We're going to be examining our experiences at Petuaria Revisited, a community archaeology project that we were filming on for a couple of days, a couple of weeks ago, in the East Riding of Yorkshire. And then at the end of this watching brief, there's a couple of lines of news that are probably worth looking at, and we'll have links to those below. One is actually an update on what the government did next regarding Stonehenge, and then, the government strikes back. So look forward to that at the end. But we're going to start. Essentially, this is a debrief. It's an after action report, as it were, on what we thought of Petraria, because we're going to be making a documentary in the coming weeks and months. I say we. I'm going to be editing primarily the footage, but we have a narrative structure that we're discussing and want to present. And part of it comes out of our impressions, and these are they in that sense. But before we talk about our impressions of this archaeological dig and why it is that we think it's important to talk about, what is it? What is Petraria Revisited, and how did it get going?
Okay, so people need to picture a small town about 8 miles west of the Port of Hull, modern Port of Hull, close to the Humber Bridge. So it's on the banks, on the north bank of the River Humber. Look south, and you see Lincolnshire. Um, and look north, and you would see the rest of Yorkshire and town important cities like York in particular. In fact, the river access to York comes past Brough on Humber as it is now, Petuaria as it
Mm.
almost certainly was in Roman times.
Hmm.
So it's a significant Roman centre. There were excavations there in the 1930s and then in the late 1950s and early 60s, which were, to say the least, tantalising. There were significant Roman walls, Roman military ditches, defensive ditches, and in particular, and most famously, an inscription where a member of the local council paid for a new proscenium for the town theatre. And obviously, a theatre in the Roman period has a certain amount of civic pride and status attached to it,
Mm.
which suggested that Petuaria was quite a significant Roman centre in the 2nd century when the
Mm.
inscription was created. So, plenty of reason for archaeologists to revisit it.
Hmm.
Um, what they were revisiting and what we were looking at was an excavation on an open area of ground called the Burrs. And it's been an open area of ground for a long, long time. It's never been built on. It's now the local playing fields. And it is administered by the local playing fields association.
The Ellerton
Um,
cum Brough Playing Field Association. Yes.
Absolutely. And this brilliant organization, who aren't just interested in administering football pitches, decided that it would be a great community project to bring archaeologists back in to revisit those earlier excavations, see if they could find the theatre, that's the headline, but basically try and understand this really important site better using modern techniques, but critically having the work done not just alongside or to, but actually by primarily the local community.
Yeah. And, and
Um,
and so all of this is stuff that we sort of hinted at in the project launch video that we produced a couple of months
mm,
ago now, where there is this question about Petraria and its existence, where it exists.
mm,
I mean, in that sense, the very fact that I never thought of there being a town there, a Roman town, never mind an
mm,
important one.
yeah.
It tells you something also actually about that relationship between the north and the south of England, and the way
Mm,
in which the characterization of the Roman world has influenced how people in this country see the north, in particular the north of England. And
yeah.
so it had that sort of multi-layered element to it, which also crucially then brings in local people, because as an extension of this notion of north and south, often, for example, northern archaeological projects, uh, they run the risk of historically, not so much these days, but historically, of being
Mm,
maybe a bunch of professionals coming into a place and doing archaeology for them or to them, or prescribing what it is that local people should find important about their local history.
mm,
This happens occasionally. Sometimes you might see it in, say, a TV production um, where it seems that yes, people get access to gardens or to plots of land that locals are able to do a little bit of digging in, but broadly speaking, the interpretation, the narrative, and the importance, the perceived importance of that narrative is shaped by the archaeologists primarily. I suppose that's a one part of the spectrum, and a little bit further, further back away, sort of to the negative. Well, yeah, the less interactive end of the spectrum would be my experience on my first ever dig was seeing archaeologists actively annoyed, never mind just sort of prescribing, but genuinely being irritated by local people, wanting to know if anything's been found. There's a variety of ways, myriad of ways in which the public interacts with archaeology, and archaeologists see the public. And in this instance, at Brough, what I found most interesting was the fact that they were deliberately, Petuaria Revisited was deliberately not only wanting local people, but also specifically wanting local people who had no previous experience of an
mm.
archaeological excavation. So, for example, not wanting people who are on the circuit, who are retired, who maybe go and dig at Vindolanda and then dig at at another site that's just opened up in Cumbria, and then maybe go to Lindisfarne and then float down to. No, they wanted people who'd never dug before. And I don't think I really understood the significance of that until I was actually down on site talking to people running the dig.
Just one last little bit of background we need to put in
Mm,
place. This wasn't just local people being let loose on what is actually a scheduled ancient monument. This is the other thing about, a large part of the area that was being dug this year was being dug with scheduled monument consent from Historic England. So they had
mhm,
to have a project design that got past Historic England's vetting process.
mhm,
It is a nationally significant site, so
mm,
you don't just dig holes in it randomly.
no.
Um, so the project was organised from the grassroots by the LSM Cumbria Playing Fields Association, who run the Burrs, but it was academically being supervised by Dr. Peter Holcomb from Hull University, and also James Lyle, again, another professional archaeologist, and there were professional trench supervisors who the local people were working to. So, it's not just giving local people a shovel and a trowel and saying, go get on with it, dig that. And I've seen a number of other projects where it's a matter of honor, really, that when you involve local people in the digging, you trust them to do all of the digging. So
Mm,
that, for example, the classic example is if you find human remains,
mm,
and so an amateur digger, a non-professional digger, a non-experienced digger, uncovers some human remains in the course of opening up a trench, and they're immediately removed so that a professional can take over.
mhm,
No,
mhm,
I've never done that. I would never want to do that, and certainly that wasn't happening on the site at Brough with Petuaria Revisited, because the whole philosophy of the project was, as you say, they wanted people who'd never dug before, weren't part of the circuit. Now, I've been told this, so it was what I was expecting, and I'm very, very pleased to say that what I saw was that being carried through. So that, for example, we had um, people who had not dug before, excavating and sensitively and well with close professional supervision, but um, actually wielding the trowels and the toothpicks and so on. Small metal finds, and a ritual pit of unknown function. So these things were being done by the 87% of the site personnel who had never done archaeology before in any form. That's an
mm,
astonishing figure to me.
mm. Hmm.
But that's the figure from the project. 87% of the people taking part had never done archaeology before. Effectively, that's the workforce. The other 13% are the professional support staff.
And so I suppose to cut one of the criticisms off at the pass that I know some people on the site were aware of, is this taking jobs away from hardworking archaeologists?
Well, no, of course it's not, because it's actually creating jobs. This is a project that wouldn't have happened without the Ellerton Cumbrath Playing Fields Association creating the project, fundraising for it, paying professional staff to come in and support the individual diggers, um, the, paying for the infrastructure, the security fencing, the shelters, the things as basic as the portaloos.
Hmm.
You know, this was something that was creating jobs to create knowledge. It was supporting the local economy by using local suppliers where possible for things like the infrastructure. It was being supported by the local branch of Morrison's. This is something that was reaching out into the community. You made the point about archaeologists being annoyed by people asking questions through a fence. This project was absolutely the opposite of that. The idea was, if somebody was walking across the burrs and happened to wander up to the fence and ask a question, not only did they get a question answered, they were then invited to come and look at some of the small finds that were being processed in public in the finds tent.
Hmm.
And so on. So there's absolutely nothing hidden about this. There's absolutely we talk a lot at the moment about open access in terms of journals. This was open access archaeology. And the other even more remarkable thing, the fundraising was effective to the extent that nobody who was there digging from the community was having to pay for the privilege.
No.
It was free.
Hmm. No, absolutely, absolutely, and actually, one of the interesting focuses that came out of conversations with staff on site was the fact that they had just simple objectives of helping people not only learn archaeological skills, which over the course of a few days people were becoming very competent at, but also actually simple things like tackling loneliness in a sort of a COVID
Yes.
or post lockdown situation. People have been working on the front lines of the pandemic. In particular, were welcome to come and dig on site, and people who simply hadn't had human interactions for a long time were welcome to come and dig on site. It was interesting in that sense, in so much as again I arrived on site not really understanding exactly what I was about to see, because often archaeological digs make or archaeological projects would make a much more of a song and dance of the social benefits of their work, if that is a stated goal of the work. And yet in this instance, it seemed to be relatively understated, and yet it's at the heart of everything that they were doing. I found that to be quite interesting, certainly.
I agree. We're in the situation at the moment where as a profession, archaeology is looking for justifications. It's looking for reasons to be. It's looking for added value that it can offer to communities to justify certainly funding. Some people would argue even its existence as a professional sector, as a recognised entity. There's a lot of questioning going on. We've seen the problems in universities. And in fact, Hull is losing its archaeology department in terms of, Dr. Halcon's retiring in September. Hull isn't going to have the presence in local archaeology, but it's had for many years. Now, but and one of the things that has been grasped by a number of people, a number of projects, is the idea that archaeology can be some kind of therapy almost for people who are suffering from loneliness or with disabilities or with mental health issues. Now, I think it has to be said that Petuaria ReVisited was making no claims about that.
No.
And in fact, objectively, the work for and against those claims doesn't yet exist. That there aren't the peer-reviewed articles looking at this issue. What there is a lot of anecdotal suggestion that just getting out with people makes people feel better. It's logical, makes
Mm.
sense.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be archaeology, though. You know, people renovating the local park, people going out with friends fishing, you know, people going out metal detecting. These ideas of, you know, getting out in company, having conversations with people, and some particularly post COVID, it does give people a greater sense of self-worth in many cases. The question is, you know, how sustainable is that? And that's a question that we're still trying to answer. And I think, and again, the people at Petuaria wouldn't say they've got an answer to that either. But I mean, again, just looking at the kind of what they were offering was almost a sort of island of company, an island of activity, an island where somebody could come and feel safe and supported and could have conversations and so on. I mean, I'll reel off a few more figures. The something like 14% of the people taking part in the digging force were either service veterans or serving military. Another nearly 20% were from blue light services who've been working in the front line of COVID. And 7% registered disabled, which again is brilliant. And astonishingly, and again, this is only possible because the way it was funded and sponsored, so that people taking part didn't have to pay. 37% of that digging force, those community volunteers, were on benefits.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It's astonishing.
Mm. Exactly. Yeah. Which is a whole demographic that the archaeological voluntary archaeological positions don't normally reach,
No,
for the most part.
no.
Whether ironically enough, archaeologists themselves are more often than not the people on digs who are on benefits. That's a whole other conversation, isn't it?
You could certainly argue that everybody working professionally in British archaeology is subsidising the profession in terms of the pay and conditions that they accept.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you could do. Yeah. Certainly. Um, okay, Grant. Well, so that's Petuaria. What are the news lines that we're going to be covering this week then? What should people be aware of and be taking a look at when they as and when they can?
It's a bit of a crunching gear change from something that's really sort of quite idealistic and arguably is a model for at least the kind of community archaeology going forward, to get back into the nuts and bolts and granular legal detail of planning applications and so on. But the two news lines this week, really, one is a follow up to last week, and that is that Highways England have issued a press release in response to the High Court quashing the planning consent for the A303 Stonehenge tunnel and upgrade across the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site. They have basically said that they're waiting for the Department for Transport to consider its options, which we already knew. They haven't. The government haven't yet said if they're planning an appeal, but then last Wednesday, David Bullock, who's the project manager of the scheme for Highways England, said that the procurement process is very much live. He said, while we have to wait for the Department for Transport to consider its options, in the meantime, we're continuing with the process to appoint a contractor for the main works phase of the scheme. We've now paused our plans to carry out early preparatory work, but the procurement process is very much live to ensure we maintain programme timescales as best as possible. And then he added, Highways England still believed it was the best solution to ongoing issues on the A303 past Stonehenge that had been developed after long and extensive collaboration with stakeholders. Now, the judge disagreed with that. He said that the government hadn't looked at enough alternatives in enough detail. And alarm bells were ringing with the campaigners because, first of all, to be carrying on, and say you're carrying on in the face of a judge saying what you were doing was unlawful, is a bit, it's not a good look. It's also the idea of appointing a main contractor before you've completed the planning process, the legal processes, is something that was allegedly done by the Garden Bridge Trust when they were trying to get the Garden Bridge built in central London. The idea is that you appoint a main contractor and the contract that you give them has penalty clauses for cancellation. And the idea is that a massive penalty clause makes the programme less cancelable. So while the immediate work, and I'm still trying to find out whether that immediate work that's been stopped includes the archaeology, but we're waiting. We will watch this space. That campaigners will certainly be afraid that you're like, it's like at the end of a zombie movie. You watch the end credits, and then at the end of just as the last credit is rolling and the copyright date is rolling past, the arm leaps out of the grave. We're at that sort of series. Is this a zombie project that's going to come back to life, or has it actually been staked out, like Dracula, and the sunlight has forced it, has turned it to ashes? We don't yet know.
But nonetheless, at the moment, there's an incentive to say that, oh, no, it will happen in some form because of contractual obligations not to cancel and this kind of thing. Yeah, presumably.
Exactly. Highways England are talking up their side of it and trying to make or deflect from the fact that they and the government were found to have made two critical legal errors in giving the project the go ahead.
Okay, cool. And the second news item that folks should take a look at this week?
It's another planning story, and it's another planning story that's been going on for some time. It's the ministerial go-ahead for a national Holocaust memorial in the gardens next to the Palace of Westminster, next to the Houses of Parliament. It's an area, it's a triangular area fronting onto the River Thames. At the moment, it's a quiet, undeveloped park called Victoria Tower Gardens. And there are a few statues there. The famous statue of the Burghers of Calais is there, and a few others. And there was an instant memorial to the MP Jo Cox there when she was murdered. It's a place for quiet contemplation. It has been slated to be the site of somewhere which arguably needs quiet contemplation, which is the Holocaust. There is a plan to build the National Holocaust Memorial there. It has been controversial because it is an undeveloped park. Traffic access, it's already in a traffic choke part of central London. It's also part of the World Heritage Site, the Westminster World Heritage Site, which takes in the Houses of Parliament and Westminster Abbey. It's a 100 million budgeted project. Leading architects have been involved. Eventually, it went to the planning inspectors, like Stonehenge, but unlike Stonehenge, the planning inspectors said the project should go ahead. It was called in by the government, and the minister in the last week also gave it the go ahead. As I say, nobody, even people who oppose the project going ahead in the Victoria Gardens, in the Victoria Tower Gardens, objects to a national museum where the country can contemplate the Holocaust. Britain was involved in some very difficult, still some very difficult issues at the time of the Holocaust in terms of refugees it let in and refugees it didn't. People might have heard of the Kinder transport and amongst other issues, and the whole argument about whether or not to bomb the Auschwitz camp, death camp, the crematoriums when they were identified by Polish underground agents. So it's an area that it's an area that has to be remembered, and it has to be remembered in the context, of course, of other more recent genocides and human rights issues. People will be aware of the controversy around the treatment of the Uyghur people by the Chinese government at the moment. Similar language is being used. It's an important issue. The argument is whether this was the right place. And I'll just leave you with a couple of thoughts, really. I mean, we've got some links below. People can go and investigate this for themselves. I mean, the context of the argument is, why build it here, particularly when the Imperial War Museum has a multi-million-pound new Holocaust exhibition opening in a few weeks' time, in fact, in September, I think. And is there a more appropriate site? The Mary van der Zijl, who's the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, said that I'm proud that the memorial is being built in the heart of our country so it can be visited by millions. I know that long after I and the other survivors are gone, the UK will continue to remember the Holocaust and learn what happens when hatred reigned. And she put it in the context as well of the persecution of Roma and gay and disabled people, and said that the memorial will also speak to that. At the same time, Crossbench peer, that's a non-party affiliated peer, member of the House of Lords, Ruth Deach, Baroness Deach. Her father fled Nazi persecution, and she said that the public inquiry raised serious concerns about the plan's impact on the heritage and a valuable public park, as well as raising issues of flood risk, security, and damage to mature trees. Those are the practical objections that were raised to this project. And then she said, we passionately believe that the Holocaust should be remembered, but we believe this is an ill-considered and damaging proposal. It'll do a disservice to victims and survivors and little to enhance understanding and respect. Two opposing views there from people with similar cultural investments in remembering the Holocaust. It's a really knotty one. People will come up with their own conclusions, and there is still the possibility that the opponents of the scheme, say Victoria Tower Gardens, may appeal the ministerial decision and seek a judicial review, but we don't know. It's probably more likely than not that the project will now go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's something else to keep an eye on, I guess. And as you say, there's not. I can't think of many people who would object to the notion of the memorial, but it's just where it goes and the impact of it that's now the question. I suppose that's it for the week. Thank you guys for watching. Next week we will return with whatever archaeological news takes our fancy. And until then, do take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.